a self-improvement company branded women with their founders' initials as part of their membership ritual for 15 years. Inside Fortune 500 corporations, the FBI watched for years. The women were branded. Not one executive was charged. This is the debrief.
The tattoo was something I was very not okay with. And she said to me she'd work through my issues around it, even though I didn't like it. And I trusted her that I somehow needed this. And I went along with it.
What I'm about to describe is documented in federal court records, FBI files, survivor testimony, congressional testimony, the transcripts of a trial that ended with a conviction on all counts. This is not speculation. This is not conspiracy. This is what happened inside a company that operated in plain sight for nearly 20 years, that recruited doctors, lawyers, and Fortune 500 executives, that held seminars in hotels across the United States, Canada, and Mexico, and that systematically dismantled the psychological identity of thousands of people using techniques that had been documented in clinical psychology literature for decades.
So, how easy was this for you to join in?
The company was called NXIVM, and the most disturbing thing about its story is not what it did, it's how completely normal it looked while it was doing it. Here's what made NXIVM so extraordinarily dangerous. It looked exactly like every other professional development company. The flagship product was called ESP, Executive Success Programs, courses designed to help professionals identify personal limitations, overcome psychological blocks, and perform better in their careers and relationships. The curriculum was dense, intellectual. It drew on real psychological frameworks, enough to seem credible.
Helps them by recognizing the source of their desire.
Thousands enrolled, not naive people, not vulnerable people. Doctors, lawyers, entrepreneurs, high-ranking corporate executives, and the program gave them every reason to believe they were right to be there. Participants were assigned numerical rankings called stripes, indicating their progress. The higher your stripe, the more you had invested, financially, emotionally, and time. The more you had invested, the harder it was to walk away. This was not accidental. Every element of the program's structure, the rankings, the sashes, the peer accountability groups, the specialized language, was engineered with one specific purpose: to make leaving feel like failure. That is not personal development. That is a retention mechanism. And it was just the front door. Keith Raniere was born in 1960 in Brooklyn, New York. He had studied psychology, influence, and behavioral conditioning with unusual seriousness. And the NXIVM curriculum was not random. It was constructed around specific, documented techniques for breaking down identity and rebuilding it around loyalty to the group. Step 1. Isolation from outside relationships. Not dramatic isolation, subtle isolation. The gradual reframing of outside friendships as threats to your personal growth. Step 2. Language control. NXIVM had its own vocabulary. Members used it constantly. It created an in-group identity and made outside communication subtly harder.
There was nothing to sell because what I was really doing was providing the people I cared about with the best opportunity they would ever find.
Step 3. Sleep deprivation during intensive retreats. Not extreme enough. Step 4. Public confession sessions. Members disclosed deeply personal information, which then existed on record, which then became leverage. Step 5. The concept of readiness. If you questioned the program, that was proof you weren't ready to grow. If you considered leaving, that was evidence of your personal limitations. That reframe, turning doubt into personal weakness, is one of the most effective psychological control mechanisms in documented clinical literature. Raniere didn't invent it, but he applied it with unusual precision, and then he built something worse on top of it. By the mid-2000s, NXIVM had expanded. New chapters across North America, a private school, a dance studio, celebrity participants. One of them was Allison Mack. 10 seasons on Smallville, a successful, recognizable actress with a legitimate career ahead of her. She joined NXIVM in 2006. By 2015, she was one of its most powerful internal figures. And in 2015, she became a recruiter and senior figure in what investigators would later describe as the most disturbing element of the entire organization. A secret society operating inside NXIVM called DOS, called DOS. In Latin, Dominus Obsequius Sororium, master over slave women, structured in a pyramid. Raniere at the top, a small group of masters beneath him, and beneath each master, a group of slaves. Recruits were told they were joining an exclusive women's empowerment group. They were not told the group's actual name. They were not told who was at the top. And before they were told anything further, they were required to provide collateral, photographs, financial documents, written confessions, some true, some fabricated on instruction, that could be used against them if they ever spoke about what they had joined. And then, in initiation ceremonies, members were branded physically with a cauterizing pen with Keith Raniere's initials. I want to be precise about who we're talking about here. The women who went through this were not naive. They were not weak. They were accomplished professionals who had been systematically conditioned over months and years by a program specifically designed to make exactly this moment feel like a reasonable next step. This is what the architecture was for. Every session, every ranking, every confession, every reframe of doubt as weakness. All of it was building towards this specific moment of compliance. March 2018, Keith Raniere arrested in Mexico, where he had fled after the story broke. April 2018, Allison Mack arrested in New York. June 2019, after a 7-week federal trial, Raniere convicted on all counts: racketeering, forced labor, sex trafficking, wire fraud, child exploitation material. Sentenced to 120 years in federal prison. Allison Mack pleaded guilty to racketeering charges, sentenced to 3 years. 3 years. For her role in recruiting women into a secret society where they were blackmailed and branded. 3 years. Nancy Salzman, NXIVM co-founder, sentenced to 3.5 years. The organization ceased to exist. And the question that the sentencing guidelines could not answer was how thousands of people had their psychological identities systematically dismantled by a company operating openly in hotel conference rooms across North America for nearly 20 years before anyone with a badge walked through the door. Here's the part of the story that I want you to sit with. NXIVM recruited doctors and recruited lawyers. It recruited successful business executives who had navigated competitive professional environments their entire careers. Educated, intelligent, accomplished. People who were absolutely certain they could never be manipulated. And that certainty, that is precisely the point. The tools NXIVM used are not unique to NXIVM. Versions of them exist in high-pressure sales environments, in certain religious organizations, in some corporate cultures. The ranking systems, the specialized language, the reframing of doubt as weakness, the escalating investment that makes leaving feel like failure. Look at the organization you spent the most time in over the last 5 years. How many of those elements were present? I am not suggesting your employer is running a cult. I am suggesting that the difference between a high-pressure corporate culture and a coercive control system is usually one of degree, not of kind. That's the debrief on NXIVM. The question I keep returning to is not how Keith Raniere did this. The clinical literature explains how he did this. The question is how a company operating on this scale, in this many cities, for this many years, operated in plain sight, without consequence, for so long. That question does not have a satisfying answer. Subscribe to Debrief if this is the kind of story you want more of. Next week, we're pulling the file on a Scottish general who walked into the most sophisticated financial market on Earth and sold it a country that didn't exist. See you then.